I will bless the Lord at all times. God's praise shall continually to be in my mouth. Behold, how good and how pleasant it is for brothers and sisters to dwell together in unity. Thank you so very much for that very warm welcome and that gracious introduction. What you all did not know is that Mr. Livingston, Reverend Livingston, actually, before he became a part of the staff here, used to introduce me all across this country. He's getting good at it. Thank you so much. I also want to acknowledge that the stole I'm wearing is not my own. This stole I purloined from the Reverend Dr. Livingston. Thank you for your kindness in letting me use your stole today. So, anyway, there are several things we need to do. It used to be that when I'd stand up here, Gene Laubach, who was the person sort of leading things for a while, I think he would look at his watch just to make sure that I understood that a Riverside sermon, unlike the traditional Baptist sermon, normally 20 minutes is about all you get. If that's the case, I'd better get started with what I've got to do. Before I move along, I don't want to overlook the fact that today we are blessed with the presence of my beloved spouse who worked with me during the 18 years I was senior minister here. And when I can, I try my best to have her accompany me. And then whenever that happens, we do what we call the Betty Forbes ministry. And the way we do that is, and right now, if there are any couples in the building that are sitting together, will you please stand? Any couples? Okay, now what I want you to do, Betty, there you are. How are you, Betty? Glad to have you with us today. This is the Betty Forbes ministry. I would like for the couples to take each other by the hand, look each other in the eye, and after we say these words, depending upon your spirit and your style, I want you to close it with either a kiss or a hug, or if you're just the handshaking kind, that's okay too. So, Betty, as I look at you, by the way, Betty and I are moving right on in age. I'm 84, Betty is 84. And we've been married for 55 years. And we have learned, when possible, to do this. I say these words. They said to have a long, wonderful relationship, you need to be exuberant about your love for your mate. And so, will you repeat these words that I say to Betty? Betty, you're the cream in my coffee. Say, you're the sugar in my tea, honey on my biscuit, and the only fish in my sea. I'll give you your kiss later, Betty. God bless you. The title of today's presentation is There's Power in the Problem. And the subtitle is The God Who Delivers from a Perfect Storm. The message I share today is inspired by an insight from the final evening before the assassination of Martin Luther King, Jr. It was a stormy night, that April 3rd, 1968. It was a night of fierce winds. A night of fierce winds. torrential rain, lightning, and thunder. The storm was so powerful that night because you can't hear me, Gwen? Well, if I talk too loud, they say, there goes that Pentecostal preacher again. But I'll do the best I can. That night, lightning flashing, thunder rolling. But the reality is, that wasn't the real issue. The real issue was that day, before they left Atlanta, they were told, you probably should not go to Memphis because the word is out that a contract has been put out on your life. If you were wise, you would not go to Memphis. But he went on in spite of the storm. And as I say, when he arrived, as night approached, it was an awful, awful storm. But that wasn't new to him. All his life there had been storms. He was born in segregation with the dehumanizing darts of diminishment and disgrace around all the time. Suffering the pain of second-class stigmatization and brutalization, he had grown up in storms despite the relative advantage of his middle-class black well-being. I now find myself wondering if the thing that finally caused Dr. King to accept the call to ministry was his desire to help his people learn how to cope with storm-plagued existence. From the time Martin assumed leadership of the Montgomery Improvement Association, storms, he had known non-stop storms of adversity, arrest, imprisonment, scowls, and scorn. In the civil rights struggle, the opposition to the war in Vietnam, and the Poor People's Campaign, storms had dogged his trail like the hound of heaven. But through it all, he had learned a profound theological lesson that had taught him how, even when the winds are blowing, or the lightning is flashing, or the thunder was rolling, he had learned how to withstand the fiercest storm. So that the night before his death, in his final speech, this is what he said. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop and I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. And I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Although it's thundering and lightning and the storm is raging, I'm not worried. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. How timely is this weekend celebration? This is the week we celebrate his birth, but always implied in that is his death as well. So, brothers and sisters, I want to interview you, and by the way, there'll be a considerable amount of interaction. Are you aware that we right now are in the midst of a storm? The storm of political partisanship, the storm of racial bigotry, the storm of economic exploitation, international interference in our affairs, the storm of voter suppression, the storm of gross criminality in high places, the storm of unjust taxation, the storm of shameful incarceration, the storm of religious hypocrisy and apostasy, and also of religious intolerance, the storm of moral and spiritual degeneracy, and Dr. King would say, and the list goes on. In fact, I think for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear, we are in the midst of a perfect storm. Maybe, thank you, Sister Dunlop, maybe we ought to call you back up here to sing for us. Don't know why there's no sun up in the sky, stormy weather. Not about the fact that me and my man ain't together, but since well-being and we are not together, keeps raining all the time, all the time. Can't go on. Everything I had is gone. Stormy weather. Since integrity and we are not together. Since truth and we are not together. Since justice and the community not together, keeps raining all the time. Now, here I am today. All I want to do is I want to share with us, and I want us to share with the nation, with the United States of America. Thank you for those who have improved the technology so that what's said here is heard around the nation. I've got a word from Dr. King's experience that helps us to know what to do when you're in the middle of a perfect storm. And I hope that we can help get this word out. You're in charge of social justice, you're the head of the commission. We are called upon to get this word out that Dr. King has given us. People have started to trivialize his holiday. But we've got a message. We've got a message Dr. King gave us, which if we can get it over to the nation, might help save us in the midst of this perfect storm we are going through. So what was the message? I think the message was helped by the Jonah passage. Did you all hear what was said in the Jonah passage? That God says to Jonah, go to that great city, Nineveh, and cry aloud against it. And Jonah had ethnic problems. There was some xenophobia in the brother. go to try to save them. I don't want to see them saved. I want them killed. I want them dead. I want them punished. So instead of going towards Nineveh, goes down to Joppa, pays his money, gets on the boat going towards Tarshish. And the text is fascinating because if you read the full text, you will see that each time the author of this story of Jonah would say he was going to Tarshish away from the presence of God. Now, y'all, excuse me, I've been down south and I've learned from the black church that sometimes you tell people, turn to your neighbor and say, trying to get away from the presence of God. Repeat that, trying to get away from the presence. And what happens then is God hurls a great storm down, and it becomes a perfect storm. This makes it a little bit longer. I think you can handle it. When you try to get away from the presence of God, you are likely to encounter, say, a perfect storm. That's what happened. So badly where they tossed and turned that the theologians aboard ship said, no, a storm can't be this bad unless God is mad about something. They finally worked it out. They found that the Jonah was causing the perfect storm. So Jonah finally said, well, okay, it doesn't make sense for one man to be sleeping in the bottom of the boat and the rest of all these people die. It doesn't make sense for one man to cause all of the crew and passengers to be destroyed. So Jonah said, well then, throw me overboard. They picked him up, threw him in the water. They were frightened that they had done so, even to save themselves, because they really thought that they were destroying him. Sometimes an action that you think may be capable of destroying somebody may be saving them. So, I'm going to be Dr. King now for just a moment. So, they discovered that their action of throwing him into the water was not so much destroying him as putting him in the hands of the God who delivers in the midst of a perfect storm. Oh, basically, I could just about end my sermon and let you preach it the rest of the way. Sometimes what appears to be a destructive gesture may be something different. Because, you see, many times people try to save face in what may actually be a disgrace. If you are running away from the presence of God, you need to know that you could save face, but what good is saving face and losing your mortal soul? Save face, huh? But lose your mortal soul? So Dr. King would let us know, no, the story says God recognized that Jonah was contrary to the directions he had been sent, But God is not so much interested in giving punishment. No, what God wants to do is God would like for you to understand that if you could stop worrying so much about saving faith, you may encounter saving grace. Saving grace. That God is not interested in destroying any of us for our transgressions, our shortcomings. No, God is saying if you could just face the fact that you're in a perfect storm because you are running away from the presence of God, if you could only see it, there's grace for you. That's the message for today. If you don't get anything else, get that. There's grace. In fact, the way Dr. King preached his sermon, Shattered Dreams, in his book, The Strength to Love, he ended it up with a lesson that I would like to be able to share with you as part of what I hope Riverside Church will be in a position to share with the world. I'm going to risk, as I used to do, coming down and tell you what it was. This whole idea of the God who delivers in the midst of a perfect storm. You the head of the Commission on Social Justice? Hey, brother. The Lord God Almighty is looking for the Riverside Church to recognize that it too is in the midst of a perfect storm. Been in a storm since Campbell. Been in a storm since James Foreman walked down these aisles the year after Martin Luther King died. Hey, we've been in a storm all along. And the ability for the Riverside Church to give this nation a message that can save it from the storm it's in will require the church to recognize that, y'all, our problem has always been that we are such a beautiful edifice and we are such a wonderful space and our endowment was so wonderful and everything. Isn't it interesting? The issue is if we are to get this message out to help save America, we've got to recognize that we're in a perfect storm. And we can either seek to save face, the grand and glorious Riverside Church, saving face, or is this church ready to seek saving grace? Not faith saving. Well, I'm coming down a little closer to you because there was another storm too going on. This storm was the one that Paul tells us about, that he had been before King Agrippa, and that's fascinating how religion and government work together. They work together. And he had appealed to go to Rome. And Agrippa said, to Rome you shall go. And that trip on the way to Rome that you'll read about in the 27th chapter of Acts, that trip was the worst trip he had ever had in his life. They tried to set out to go, but then the rains came and the winds blew. It was just, they were in the midst of a perfect storm. One period of time they were there and had only just a moment in which for 14 days they did not see the sun or stars. It was just awful. So one night, while it was thundering, while it was lightning, Paul experienced something. The angel of the Lord, he says, the angel of the Lord whose I am and whom I worship stood by me and said, don't worry, Paul. I know it's lightning and I know the rain and it's storming and the winds are blowing. But don't you worry, because you need to know that although there is this storm and it's a problematical voyage, you need to know there's power in the problem. And what is the power that's in the problem? It is that from the dawn of creation, God has always, wherever there is a raging storm, God gets in the middle of the storm in order that God might bring the storm to a conclusion. And Dr. King would have added to it that word, the Lord was teaching Paul, listen, all things work together for good to those who love God, who are the called according to his purposes. I'm going to ask you all, I want you all to recite this word, and I want you to recite it loudly enough that it will be heard all across. I don't mean decibel level, but in terms of the intensity. Will you all repeat after me? All things work together for good to those who love the Lord and are called according to God's purpose. Oh, Riverside, if you could get that message out, we might save America from the perfect storm we are in. Paul found out several things. There's power, God's presence, the God who delivers. There's power in a problem if God's person is in it. There's power because he says, listen, the God whose I am and who I worship. God was saying, look, my person is in this problem. Therefore, I have to get in the problem with the person to bring the deliverance that's necessary. But there's another way you can tell there's power in the problem. There's power in the problem if God's purpose is in it. I want you to stand before the emperor in Rome. Let the wind blow. Let struggles come. Let the water lap over into the boat. Ain't nothing the water, the wind, the thunder, or the lightning can do to prevent my will from being done. And finally, Dr. King said that night, it's a night, I don't know what's going to happen now. Things are going to be pretty bad. I'd like to live a long time. This may be the end. And then he said, I just want to do God's will. That's the mantra. I'm getting ready to interview you as a congregation. I'm getting ready to interview Riverside. Riverside, the problems that I didn't solve when I was here. Coffin didn't solve them when he was here. Amy didn't solve when she was here. Rev, good luck to you. Maybe you can. No. None of us can solve the Riverside problem. What we have to do is, hey, brother, this is a little melodramatic. I was here for 18 years, but for folks that can't let me go, y'all got to, let me tell you, I don't want the storm to be on. Hey, come on here, come on. Throw me, just throw me not so much overboard. Throw me into the hands of God. The God who can come in the midst of a perfect storm and deliver you. So you just do this. I've done this myself. Just take me back a little bit. Put me in the hands of God. It ain't Forbes. It ain't Amy. It ain't Coffin. It's not these men or women that we got. No, but put us in the hands of the God who is able. And that's the only way we can do it. Thank you so very much. By the way, now I know that's what I did. I didn't know I was doing that. I didn't know I was throwing you overboard. There are two people, the two people that you say you're the first woman that I baptized while I was here. Okay, so I didn't know when I baptized you, I was basically throwing you overboard. Throwing you not so much overboard, but into the hands of the God who is able to deliver from a perfect storm. Well, if you haven't gotten the message now, talking any longer is not going to help you. This week, we continue impeachment proceedings and all of that stuff. I wish you all could get this message out to the family. Saving faith or saving grace. I wish you could get this to the congressmen, especially the Democrats who think that especially the Republicans need it. No, Democrats and Republicans need to know that only the God who is able to deliver from the perfect storm can help our nation be what it ought to be. Well, I'm closing myself now. I take the privilege of the emeritus pastor to just say, I know what I'm talking about. I know what I'm talking about. I would never have ended up here at this church in the first place if the Lord had not taken me when I had gotten down to my last quarter. I've told you all this before. Last quarter, went and bought 3 tangerines, and through that tangerine, the Lord allowed me to meet Shelby Rooks, and Shelby Rooks helped me to get a scholarship to Union, and from there, I was from Union over there. I used to come over here once every year and preach, and when 200 people applied for the position, but anyway, you all decided to take the demon that you knew from across the street. From my getting down, I was getting ready to drop out of college. But the God who knows how to deliver you from a perfect storm lifted me and landed me in this wonderful place sometimes. It ain't always wonderful. But then just April the 16th, and then I'm really, Betty, don't tell me to sit down any longer. On the 16th of April, I was thrown overboard. At Union Seminary, coming down the steps, go to the bathroom, I stumbled down 7 steps, banged against the door, bounced off the door, and ended up falling 7 more steps down. My head hit against the concrete wall. That's why that knot is there on my head right now. I should have died. I would have died. I was in the midst of a perfect storm. But there's a God who said, no, I may want him to preach one more sermon at Riverside, one more time. The Lord saved me from that. And Gwen Shepherd, God bless your soul for being here. And Witherspoon, God bless your soul over in the corner. Yeah, that God spared my life. And ever since then, I've been trying to go around and tell people, yeah, I had a fall, but what I thought was my end was actually not so much about the end of my life or the punishment for my shortcomings. No. God spared me in order that I might go around to tell people across this country. We know that all things work out. If anybody here is in your perfect storm, I want to tell you one more time, all things, I don't care how bad it is. If you are addicted, I know you've been rowing, trying to get, you might not handle it, but if you can put yourself in the hand of the one that calmed the water, the one that calmed the sea, let me tell you, there is deliverance. And so I want to go back and behave like a Riverside pastor is supposed to behave. But let me tell you, I have been talking about this God ever since I left you all. And let me tell you, I know it's true. It's true for you. Hey, it's true for you. It's true for you. If you can just be thrown overboard into the hands of God, I say to you today that God has done that for me, and I think maybe you all ought to take a chance to believe and trust Him. Put this church, hey preacher, You can't solve this thing. I tried for 18 years. But if you can get this church into the hands of the God that delivers in a perfect storm, oh, what legacy, what legacy. Well, I wanted to say this as I close to you. Look, I want you all to stand up wherever you are and help me bring this sermon to a conclusion. If I can't do it by myself, you ought to be able to help me. So here's the word. I want you to think about this. When Dr. King was in the situation facing death, he said, I just want to do God's will. Can you say those words with Dr. King? I just want to do. What about when you're voting? I just want to. What about when you're making decisions in an impeachment trial? What about when there are conflicts in the church itself? So then, if you mean that, then repeat these words after me. I say, in the way that I walk, in the way that I talk, in the way that I think, and in the way that I pray. In everything I do, I want to honor you by the way I live each day. Come on, in the way that I walk, in the way that I talk, in the way that I think, and in the way that I pray. In everything I do, I want to honor you by the way I live each day. Come on, some action. In the way that I walk, in the way that I talk, in the way that I think, and in the way that I pray. In everything I do, I want to honor you by the way I live each day. And let me tell you, you may have problems, but there's power in that problem.